November 13th, 1944, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Staff Sergeant Junior Spurrier crouched at the western edge of Achain, France, watching his company attack from the opposite side of the village. The Browning automatic rifle in his hands weighed 23 pounds. The streets ahead crawled with German soldiers from the 11th Panzer Division. Most men would have waited for their squad. Spurrier walked forward alone. What happened next would earn him the Medal of Honor and become one of the most extraordinary displays of individual combat skill in World War II history. One man. 6 hours. 25 confirmed German soldiers killed, 2 officers captured, all while fighting through a fortified village alone, picking up whatever weapons he found and using them with deadly precision against an enemy that outnumbered him at least 10 to 1. By the time darkness fell over Achain, the village streets were littered with spent casings, American and German, and the sole survivor walking those streets was a Virginia farm boy who had just redefined what one soldier could accomplish when he refused to wait for backup. This is the story of Junior Spurrier's rampage through Achain, a story about a man whose skill with every weapon he touched turned him into a one-man army and a living nightmare for the Wehrmacht. Junior James Spurrier was born James Era Spurrier, Jr. on December 14, 1922, in the Castlewood area of Russell County, Virginia. His family knew poverty intimately. The Great Depression had crushed Appalachia, and the Spurrier family, Father Ira, Mother Ruby, and 6 children, moved frequently, chasing work that never lasted. Young Junior quit school in 7th grade to help support his family. He tried farming. He found work at a civilian conservation corps camp in Bluefield, West Virginia. Nothing stuck. When his mother Ruby died in summer 1940, something broke in the 18-year-old, or hardened. On September 25, 1940, he walked into a recruiting station and enlisted in the Army. He filled out the paperwork incorrectly, accidentally listing his name as Junior rather than James Ira, Jr. The name stuck. The Army didn't immediately know what to do with this wiry, undisciplined kid from the mountains. Spurrier struggled with military discipline. He hated taking orders. He got into fights. He drank too much. His superiors noted that while he showed promise, his inability to follow rigid Army structure made him unsuitable for leadership. He would never command men. But there was something else in those early evaluations, something his officers couldn't quite articulate. Spurrier had an almost supernatural ability with weapons. Any weapon. Give him a rifle he'd never fired, and within minutes he could use it better than men who'd trained with it for months. He understood the mechanics of killing with an instinctive clarity that unnerved even his instructors. The Army deployed him to the South Pacific. In fall 1943, during combat in New Guinea, Spurrier was wounded and sent back to recover. Most men would have taken the medical discharge. Spurrier volunteered to return to combat. He joined the 35th Infantry Division, landing in Normandy on July 6, 1944, D-Day +1, with Company G, 134th Infantry Regiment. By then, he wore staff sergeant stripes, though his lack of discipline meant commanders assigned him as a company runner rather than giving him a squad to lead. This assignment, meant as punishment, became his greatest tactical advantage. As a runner, Spurrier operated independently. He could fight alone, which was exactly how he preferred it. On September 16, 1944, near Les Saint-Christophe, France, Spurrier gave his superiors their first glimpse of what he could do. During an attack on a heavily defended German position, Spurrier mounted an American tank destroyer while it was moving and took control of its .50 caliber machine gun. Standing fully exposed to enemy fire, he systematically engaged German positions, killing at least a dozen enemy soldiers before the tank destroyer reached the summit. Then he dismounted, destroyed 2 enemy dugouts with grenades, and captured 22 German prisoners despite being completely alone. His fellow soldiers started calling him the one-man army. The nickname wasn't affection. It was equal parts respect and fear. Spurrier fought with a cold efficiency that bordered on inhuman. He didn't seem to feel fear. He didn't hesitate. He saw enemies as problems to be solved through overwhelming violence, and he solved those problems with methodical precision. The Distinguished Service Cross he received should have been warning enough, but nothing that happened in September could have prepared anyone, American or German, for what Spurrier would do in November. By early November 1944, the 35th Infantry Division was grinding eastward through Lorraine. Every village was a fortress, every field was mined. The Germans were falling back toward their homeland, but they were making the Americans pay for every yard in blood. The 11th Panzer Division, veterans of the brutal Eastern Front, had been rushed to the area. These weren't green recruits. These were hardened survivors of some of the war's most savage fighting. The village of Achain sat astride the American axis of advance. On November 13th, the 2nd Battalion received orders to take and hold the village. The attack would involve crossing 1,500 yards of open ground, 700 yards under direct German small arms fire, plus concentrations of artillery and mortar fire. It would be costly. Everyone knew it. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Company G launched their assault from the east, advancing in standard infantry formation, squads moving in coordinated bounds, laying down suppressing fire, taking cover, advancing. The Germans were ready. Machine gun fire raked the open ground. Artillery shells walked across the formations. Men fell. The assault slowed. Staff Sergeant Junior Spurrier watched this from his position as company runner. He watched his company advancing into a meat grinder. He watched men dying in the fields outside Achain. And then he made a decision that would have gotten most soldiers court-martialed if they had survived it. Spurrier passed around the village, while his entire company attacked from the east, drawing every German defender's attention and firepower. Spurrier moved alone in a wide flanking maneuver to the western side of Achain. He carried his Browning automatic rifle, 20 rounds in the magazine, and enough additional magazines to make this interesting. He had grenades clipped to his webbing. He had his M1 Garand slung across his back as backup. And he had something that couldn't be carried or quantified, absolute confidence in his ability to kill anyone who got in his way. At 2 o'clock, as his company engaged the Germans from the east, Spurrier walked into the western side of Achain and opened fire. The first 3 Germans died without understanding what was happening. Spurrier caught them in the street, probably moving to reinforce positions facing the main American attack. The bar in his hands spoke with its distinctive hammering roar, 350 rounds per minute in controlled bursts. The weapon, designed to provide automatic fire support for an entire squad, became in Spurrier's hands an instrument of surgical violence. The 3 Germans dropped where they stood. Spurrier kept moving. The streets of Achain were designed centuries ago for different warfare. Narrow lanes twisted between stone buildings. Courtyards opened unexpectedly. Alleys dead-ended into defensive walls. It was a nightmare for attackers, unless you were alone, unless you moved with the speed and unpredictability of a single hunter rather than a coordinated unit. Spurrier moved like smoke through the village, appearing where Germans least expected, firing, killing, and disappearing before they could organize a response. A German machine gun position covering the eastern approach became aware of gunfire behind them. The crew turned to investigate. Spurrier was already there. The bar fired. The gun crew died. Spurrier picked up one of the fallen soldiers' grenades, a German Model 24 steel hand granite, the distinctive potato masher, pulled the cord, counted, and threw it into a basement entrance where he'd seen movement. The explosion was muffled by stone walls. Nothing emerged from the basement. Spurrier's bar was empty, 20 rounds gone in less than a minute. Instead of reloading, he unslung his M1 Garand. The semi-automatic rifle held 8 rounds in an en-bloc clip and was, according to General Patton, the greatest battle implement ever devised. In Spurrier's hands, it was a death sentence delivered with mechanical efficiency. 8 shots. 8 German soldiers who made the mistake of trying to engage this lone American who had materialized in their rear like a ghost. The metallic ping of the M1's empty clip ejecting became a sound of terror for the Germans in Achain. It meant Spurrier was reloading. It meant he was still alive. It meant he was still coming. Somewhere in the next hour's chaos, Spurrier found what would become his favorite weapon. An American bazooka, the M101 rocket launcher. Someone, probably an American squad that had been pinned down or forced to retreat, had abandoned it. Spurrier picked it up. The bazooka was designed as a 2-man weapon, one soldier to aim and fire, another to load. Spurrier used it alone. He loaded it himself. He fired it himself. And he used it to reduce German defensive positions to rubble and corpses. A tank barrier blocking one of the main streets, reinforced concrete and steel designed to stop American armor, disappeared in a flash of high explosive. The Germans using it for cover died in the blast or from shrapnel. Spurrier reloaded the bazooka and kept moving. By now, the Germans in Achain understood something catastrophic was happening. The main American assault from the east had bogged down as expected, but soldiers were dying behind their defensive lines, positions were being overrun from behind, explosions erupted in unexpected places, and always, always there was the sound of that American automatic rifle, never where they expected it, always where they were most vulnerable. The German garrison commander tried to organize a response. Small groups were detached from the main defensive line to hunt down this American, or these Americans, because surely no single soldier could be causing this chaos. These hunter teams moved through the streets in 3- and 4-man groups, weapons ready, covering each other, using proper tactical movement. Spurrier killed them all. He ambushed a 4-man team as they rounded a corner, the bar firing from 15 feet away. At that range, the .30-06 rounds didn't just kill, they destroyed. He caught another group in a courtyard using grenades first to stun them, then finishing survivors with rifle fire. A 3rd team nearly got him. They had good cover and had him pinned behind a stone wall, until Spurrier noticed an abandoned German Panzerschreck rocket launcher, the German equivalent of the American bazooka. The Panzerschreck fired a larger, more powerful rocket. Spurrier had never used one before. That didn't matter. He loaded it, aimed it, fired it, and the building the Germans were using for cover ceased to exist as a viable defensive position. The systematic destruction of these hunter teams broke something in the German defense. Word spread. There was something wrong with this American, this soldier who fought like a demon, who used their own weapons against them, who appeared and disappeared like a nightmare. Some younger German soldiers, conscripts rushed to the front with minimal training, simply fled. The veterans, men who had survived Russia, tried to hold their positions and wait for darkness. But Spurrier wasn't waiting. As afternoon wore into evening, Spurrier pushed deeper into the village. He was running low on ammunition for his bar and M1, but Achain was littered with German weapons. He picked up a German automatic pistol and used it to clear buildings at close range. He collected more grenades from fallen soldiers. He found another Panzerschreck with rockets and used it to destroy a fortified building housing a German observation post. The noise of battle created its own fog of war. Spurrier used this to his advantage. The Germans couldn't pinpoint his location because he was never in the same place twice. He would fire from a window, then appear 2 buildings away. He would throw grenades into a basement, then assault a different position, while Germans reacted to the explosion. His tactics weren't sophisticated. They were simply relentless. He gave the Germans no time to think, no time to organize, no time to do anything but react and die. From Company G's perspective, still fighting their way into Achain from the east, the German defense seemed to be collapsing for no apparent reason. Positions that should have held were abandoned. German soldiers were falling back in disorder. Some were surrendering. Others were simply running. The company commander, pushing his men forward, had no idea the chaos was being caused by one of his own men operating independently on the far side of the village. By late afternoon, the German garrison commander realized his position was untenable. The Americans were pushing from the east. Behind his lines, an unknown number of enemy soldiers, he estimated at least a squad, possibly a platoon, were systematically destroying his positions. His communication with higher headquarters was cut. Casualties were mounting. The situation was lost. The only question was whether to die in place or preserve what remained of his command. He chose preservation. Gathering what officers and soldiers he could find, he began organizing a withdrawal to the northeast, toward German lines. But first, someone would have to determine the strength and position of the American forces in their rear. 2 German officers volunteered to lead a patrol to investigate. They walked into Junior Spurrier. The encounter happened in a street near the center of Achain as darkness began to fall. The 2 German officers, moving cautiously with a small group of enlisted men, rounded a corner and found themselves facing a lone American soldier. He was covered in stone dust and smoke residue. His uniform was torn. He held a Browning automatic rifle in one hand and a German pistol in the other. And despite being outnumbered at least 6-1, he didn't lower either weapon. The German officers later reported, after their capture, that they initially thought they had stumbled upon the survivor of some larger American unit that had been wiped out. The soldier looked exhausted. Surely he would surrender. They raised their hands and began to speak in broken English, trying to arrange a mutual ceasefire. Spurrier's response was to gesture with the bar. "Get down! On the ground! Now!" The tone of his voice, flat, emotionless, absolutely certain, conveyed what his words might not have. This soldier was not surrendering. This soldier was not negotiating. This soldier was giving them exactly one chance to stay alive, and that chance was immediate. Unconditional surrender. The 2 German officers got down. So did their enlisted men. Spurrier collected their weapons, ordered them to their feet, and marched them toward American lines at gunpoint. As they walked through Achain's streets, the German officers saw the evidence of what this one American had done. Bodies in field-gray uniforms, destroyed positions, buildings with facades blown away by rocket fire. The officers stopped counting after the first dozen dead. One of them, after the war, would tell interrogators that the walk through Achain was the most terrifying experience of his combat service, not because of the violence, but because of what it revealed about individual capacity for destruction. Spurrier delivered his prisoners to the first American position he encountered, soldiers from Company G still working their way into the village. The soldiers saw Spurrier walking toward them with German prisoners and assumed he had captured them during Company G's advance. Spurrier said nothing to correct this. He simply turned the prisoners over, checked how much ammunition he had left, not much, and headed back into the village. There was still work to do. The next 2 hours are documented only through evidence left behind and the official Medal of Honor citation. The citation states that, from this time until dark, Staff Sergeant Spurrier, using at different times his BR and M1 rifle, American and German rocket launchers, a German automatic pistol, and hand grenades, continued his solitary attack against the enemy regardless of all types of small arms and automatic weapons fire. What this sterile military language obscures is the sheer audacity of what Spurrier did. He didn't consolidate his gains. He didn't wait for support. He didn't take a defensive position and hold it. He kept attacking, alone, against an enemy force that still outnumbered him dramatically. He pushed through Achain like a force of nature, using whatever weapons he found, killing anyone who resisted, accepting the surrender of anyone who gave up. By the time darkness fell completely, the German defense had disintegrated. Some garrison members had fled northeast. Others had surrendered to Company G as the main American force pushed through the eastern sections. And in the western and central portions of Achain, Junior Spurrier had single-handedly killed 1 German officer and 24 enlisted men. He had captured 2 additional officers, the garrison commander and 1 other, and 2 more enlisted men. The math is staggering. 29 German soldiers killed or captured by 1 American in approximately 6 hours of continuous combat, while operating completely alone, while using at least 6 different types of weapons, including enemy equipment he had likely never trained with. When Spurrier finally walked out of Achain that night, a sergeant from Company G asked him where the hell he'd been. Spurrier's response, according to witnesses, was characteristically brief. In the village, taking care of business. The full scope of what Spurrier had done wasn't understood until the next day, when American troops completed their occupation and began counting bodies. Even then, initial reports were met with skepticism. 1 soldier couldn't have done all that. It had to be the result of Company G's assault, with Spurrier's actions exaggerated in the confusion. But the German prisoners told a different story. They described a lone American who attacked from the west, while the main assault came from the east. They described watching their positions being systematically destroyed by this single soldier who moved through the village like a ghost, who used their own weapons against them, who seemed to be everywhere at once. They described the growing panic as the afternoon wore on, and soldiers kept dying and nobody could kill this American who refused to stop attacking. The physical evidence supported their testimony. The distribution of German casualties showed a clear pattern, a trail of bodies running from the western edge through the center of the village, with German soldiers killed by American weapons mixed with those killed by German weapons. Weapons picked up from fallen Germans and turned against their former owners. Buildings destroyed by rocket fire from positions that couldn't have been reached by the main American assault. Defensive positions overrun from behind, from directions where no organized American unit had been operating. Company G had fought hard and suffered casualties taking Achain. But the village's capture had been made possible by 1 man who decided that waiting for a coordinated assault was taking too long. 1 man who walked into a fortified village held by veteran panzer troops and spent 6 hours systematically destroying them. The Medal of Honor citation, submitted shortly after the battle, was approved with unusual speed. On March 6, 1945, General William H. Simpson personally presented Junior Spurrier with the Medal of Honor. The citation's final line captures, in typically understated military prose, what Spurrier accomplished. His valor has shed fresh honor on the United States Armed Forces, but even the Medal of Honor doesn't fully explain how Spurrier did what he did. The mechanics are clear enough: superior marksmanship, tactical flexibility, exploitation of surprise, and an apparently complete absence of fear. But the deeper question remains. What kind of man walks alone into a fortified village and fights for 6 hours against an enemy force that outnumbers him at least 10-1? Part of the answer lies in Spurrier's background. He grew up poor in Appalachia during the Depression. He knew hardship. He knew violence. He knew what it meant to fight for survival when the world didn't care whether you lived or died. The mountains of Virginia teach lessons that military training can only approximate: self-reliance, resourcefulness, the ability to make do with what you have and keep going when everything says you should quit. Another part lies in his personality. Spurrier didn't fit the traditional military mold. He was undisciplined in garrison, but deadly in combat. He didn't follow orders well, but he understood the mission instinctively. He couldn't lead men, but he could fight better than any 10 soldiers in his company. He was someone who could kill with mechanical efficiency because he didn't process fear and hesitation the way normal people do. But perhaps the truest answer is simpler and more disturbing. Spurrier was good at killing, and he knew it. He had found the one thing in his life that he could do better than anyone else. War gave him purpose. Combat gave him clarity. Every German soldier he killed validated his existence in a way that farming or factory work or military discipline never could. He wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He was a weapon that happened to be pointed at the right enemy at the right time in history. The rest of Spurrier's war was anticlimactic compared to Achain. He remained with the 35th Infantry Division through the Battle of the Bulge, where he received a second Purple Heart after being wounded on December 9, 1944. He transferred to Company K on April 24, 1945, and returned to the United States soon after Germany's surrender. His post-war life was troubled. The skills that made him a one-man army in combat didn't translate to peacetime. He struggled with alcohol. He had run-ins with the law, resulting in 3 jail sentences, including one for attempted murder. The demons that made him such an effective killer in France followed him home and nearly destroyed him. After his last stint in jail, Spurrier quit drinking completely and started a radio and television repair shop. He retired to a cabin in Tennessee, where he lived quietly until his death on February 25, 1984, at age 61. For decades, his Medal of Honor and other decorations were thought lost. They were finally found in a safe in November 2011 and presented to his 2 surviving sisters in a ceremony on December 2, 2011. Junior Spurrier was the only soldier in the 134th Infantry Regiment to receive the Medal of Honor during World War II. He was one of 473 soldiers to receive the medal during the war. He was one of only 3,511 Americans to receive the Medal of Honor since its inception in 1862, but numbers don't capture what made Spurrier extraordinary. What makes his story remarkable, what makes it almost unbelievable, is the specificity of his achievement. He didn't hold a position against overwhelming odds. He didn't sacrifice himself to save his comrades. He didn't perform some brief, spectacular act of courage under fire. He walked alone into a fortified village and fought for 6 hours. He killed 25 confirmed enemy soldiers. He captured 4 others, including the garrison commander. He used at least 6 different weapons, including enemy equipment. He created enough chaos and destruction to collapse an organized German defense and enable his company's assault to succeed. He did all of this by himself, and when darkness fell over Achain, he walked out of that village alive. The German prisoners who survived their encounter with Spurrier carried the memory for the rest of their lives. Some, interviewed decades later, still struggled to articulate what it was like to face an enemy who seemed unstoppable. One former German officer, speaking in the 1970s, described it this way: "We had been trained to fight armies. We had fought on the Russian front where death was everywhere. But this was different. This was one man who fought like he was an army by himself. We couldn't stop him because we couldn't predict him. He did things no soldier should do alone, and he won." That's the essential truth of the Achain assault. Junior Spurrier did things no soldier should do alone, and he won. The tactical lessons from Achain are limited because Spurrier's actions can't be replicated through training or doctrine. You can't teach soldiers to fight the way he fought because most soldiers lack whatever combination of skills, instincts, and psychological makeup allowed him to operate effectively while completely isolated from friendly support. Modern military doctrine emphasizes teamwork, coordination, and combined arms precisely because individual heroics like Spurrier's are so rare as to be statistically insignificant. But that rarity is what makes his story important. In the mechanized, industrialized warfare of World War II, where battles were won by logistics and production and the grinding application of superior resources, there was still room for individual excellence. There was still a place for the soldier who could do the impossible because he didn't understand it was impossible. Junior Spurrier understood only one thing on November 13, 1944. There were Germans in Achain, and he was going to kill them or capture them until there weren't any left. He didn't think about the odds. He didn't consider the tactical implications. He didn't wait for orders or support or a better plan. He picked up his Browning automatic rifle, walked into that village, and got to work. 6 hours later, Achain belonged to the Americans. The 11th Panzer Division's garrison was destroyed, and one Virginia farm boy who had never quite fit into the army had written his name into the history of warfare as one of the most effective individual combatants in American military history. The sound of the bar firing in the streets of Achain faded into history. The bodies were buried. The village was rebuilt. The war moved on. But the legend remained. The story of the soldier who walked alone into a fortified village and won. They called him the One-Man Army. On November 13, 1944, in Achain, France, he proved that nickname wasn't hyperbole. It was simply accurate.